Hello again, Internet. It's the hamster in the man suit. Hamsters in the man suit. Whatever. Uh, ramble about writing some more. Last time I mentioned I was going to do a video right after on world building and a couple other things, and then that video didn't get posted. If you look at the comments, I do mention that one got eaten in the transfer to the computer. So, is what it is. Now we're going to focus a bit more on character to an extent, more than narration, more than narrative, the narrator, and narrative voice. And for that, we're going to look at perspective, voice, and a couple other aspects of it. So, taken English classes at high school level or higher, you've probably at some point, whether you remember it or not, heard the phrase first or third person perspective. First person is when the story is told from the I do this, I do that, I do this. Lovecraft focused almost entirely on the first person perspective. Third person perspective is he did this, she did this, they did that. And focuses, most literature focuses on that perspective. And then within third person you have focused and omniscient. And focused is you have characters that you follow, and that's who you tell a story about, and that's who you know about. And omniscient, you know about everything. And so you can take forays into watching the villain have a conversation, watching Bojangles diddle himself in the river. Whatever. And then you also have the much lesser used second person perspective. And it's lesser used not because it's just so challenging, it's lesser used because it's really, really, really hard to get people to follow that story. It's not so much that it's hard to write a story that way, it's you. It's you did this, you did that, you did this. Choose your adventure books use it. A lot of RPGs, video games use it, especially RPG Maker games and stuff like that. In that era of games that those are emulating, it's what do you do now? That's second person, and it's very, very not utilized because it's not like it's hard because it's a challenge. Hey, how you doing? It's not that it's hard because the challenge. It's hard because it's really difficult to get someone to feel the way into that characterization, because the idea basically is you're telling them what decisions they're making, unless you're doing a choose your own adventure book and then you want to use you. But like first person, that you can kind of get into it because it's when you're telling the story, even if it didn't happen to you and you're saying I'm doing this and I'm doing that, it feels a lot more like you're doing it. Whereas third person gives you a lot more breadth of experience. You can say he, she, they did, because you have the world to work with. I really like Lovecraft's horror writing, and the first person perspective is a lot of why. But he then takes another approach that adds on to that, and that's the authoritative approach. He has an authoritative narrative. His characters are written smarter than you and more knowledgeable than you, and those are two different things. And sometimes more worldly than you, but he's not great at the worldly characters because he himself wasn't that worldly. And so when something strange happens and they are terrified, he's established over the way he writes and the way they talk that they know more than you do, and they're afraid. Therefore, you should be afraid. And it's a little subtle cue. An authoritative narrative, an authoritative narrator. An authoritative narrator is a narrator who seems to know more, but is actually feels like they're telling you the story. Eden Moore is a first-person story kind of narrative. The Eden Moore series, where she's sitting down and she's having a conversation with you. I think I mentioned Sherry Priest last time, but I don't remember because I don't watch them again. And then third person. What's an example of a third person novel or story? Clive Barker's Sacrament is a good example, for the most part, of a third person focus. You hear a lot about Will and a lot about him, but it follows him. And then it branches off into Jacob and Rosa. It follows them a little, but not much. It's mainly about Will. And Lord of the Rings is basically third person throughout, and it follows characters and things like that. And then you go into Omniscient, and Omniscient is any story where it breaks away to other main characters, away from the main characters. But the narrator is the one telling the story. No matter what, even if you don't have a narrator, the narrator is the one telling the story, even if they are a non-entity. And so that narrator's voice also has to be taken into account. I was talking about last time with natural dialogue. Now we're going to talk about voice. Your narrator has a voice. As I said with Sherry Priest, her voice is conversational. It's a character who they're having a conversation with you, and they're talking with you, and it's just you and them sitting at a table, and they're telling you what happened. And all of her books that work really well feel that way. Narrator is important, though. If you have, especially if you're doing a first-person story, the narrator's telling the story. Whether or not you want them to die at the end, they're telling the story, so you have to make sure to include some way that they're passing the story along. Maybe it's a sci-fi or cyberpunk story and they're recording it in a brain chip or on a voice recorder in a closet as the things are banging on the door. Several of Lovecraft's stories are suicide notes, where they're recounting the events that drove them to suicide. But you have to leave a reason this record continues. Third person, not as important, but it's still important that you kind of have an idea of the way the third person, the narrator should talk, because it should be at least slightly different than your characters talk. That way, it doesn't imply that one of your characters is the narrator, and that way it doesn't confuse internal monologue of a character or a character's thoughts or a character's decisions with those of the narrator. It's not terribly important because you don't really, the narrator, unless you're doing like a Bard's Tale from that game, unless you're doing something like that where the narrator and the main character actually converse, you don't really have to worry too much about it because there's no dialogue from the narrator for the most part. But the reason I bring it up is because then you have to go into the voice of characters, and every character has a voice. Whether or not you mean them to or not, every character has a voice. And a character with a distinct voice is a lot more likely to draw the imagination of people than a character who has an indistinct voice. And what I mean is, you don't have to give every character a goofy accent, because it's also very hard to write a lot of goofy accents, but you do have to give a character a distinct way of speech for them to really stand out. Otherwise, every time they speak, you have to then go, and then they said, and then they said, and then they said. And it gets really kind of rhythm breaking if every paragraph you have to specifically mention who's talking in a two-person fucking conversation. So if you've got 50 characters in your story and they all talk like 50s era gangsters a la fucking Abe Vigoda's character in The Godfather, that's gonna, none of those characters are gonna stand out. You can create the richest world you want, none of those characters are really gonna stand out. But if you have one character who speaks differently, that character is gonna feel more important. It's important. You know, it also allows you to characterize characters more. An uneducated character is going to use different words than an educated character. You want to look up slang in the era or region that you're using, that you're setting. So if you're setting it in the South, lunch is dinner, dinner is supper. You know, little things like that, but they're going to be important to people who know them. And they're going to pick up on it, but it's also going to be something you can have characters converse about, something you can have characters get confused about because of changes in vernacular and differences of the way they use words. Look at Rogue from X-Men if you are a Marvel Comics fan. I I stand by the idea she wouldn't be half as popular if they hadn't literally specifically given her the southern accent. I don't think Gambit would be nearly as popular if they hadn't worked in that Creole accent for him, that kind of French Creole accent. And they just made him talk like every other character. Uh, Nightcrawler and his German accent, and it comes through in the writing, and therefore those characters feel a bit more real. You can feel a bit more characterization, and also when people picture them in their mind and they start talking about movies for them, they'll have a better idea of what kind of thing they want. And if you want your characters to resonate, you want people to kind of be able to create those kind of mental castings. Now, a good way to do that, what my brother used to talk about doing, is to cast the characters in your head. You know, what actor would you like to play this character, and have that character kind of act like that actor acts and look like that actor acts. It works for Marvel and the Ultimates when they recreated when they recreated Nick Fury for the Ultimates. They based him off Samuel L. Jackson because he's the badass guy now, whereas when he was originally created, he was based on the badass guy in those movies when Nick Fury was originally created. And they actually got Samuel L. Jackson to play him. I always thought the guy who played Cisco on Deep Space Nine would have done a really good job and cost a lot less money, but anyway, neither here nor there. But like I said, fan casting. Giving them a voice is going to help them stand out. It's as simple as that. So thinking about how your character talks, if you have a character who's domineering and overbearing, then they're never going to end a sentence in an ellipsis. They're never going to trail off. They're always going to finish very hard. And so when they do trail off, it should be an important moment. Whereas if you have a character who's shy and timid and doesn't like to make any problems, when they make a concrete, hard statement, again, should be important. And the voices of your characters can help you characterize. And now that we've gone through all of that, and I look at the clock and we're 12 minutes in, so probably another 18, 20-minute one. I'm talking about something else that's a little sketchy for some writers and readers, and that's insert characters. The first thing you're going to think of is an author insert character. That is one of the ones I'm talking about. Like the Welcome to fanfiction.net says, who do you know better than you? It's a slippery slope if you're not attentive, and that's true of any character. Actually, I should probably do a video on Mary Susan Tyler, so we're not going to go into that right now. But an author insert character is basically you, even if it doesn't have your name, even if it doesn't have your gender, but it's meant to represent you in the world. The problem with that is that people tend to not write themselves into being able to be hurt. People tend to not want to write themselves as hated or disliked, and they tend to kind of hedge towards Mary Sue, and like I said, I'm going to get to that and what that's become another video entirely. But author insert characters can also be very useful in small doses, or at least putting part of yourself into a character so you can kind of get a bit of groundwork where they came from. My suggestion is never make them your main character. Never make your author insert character your main character. Have your author insert character be kind of a side character they talk to, or maybe an expert, or even actually just like if you're doing a fantasy series or something with gods, make yourself a god in the setting. But because of that, you don't really come into play that much. So you can kind of come in, have your personality inject if you must. But in the end, what I'd honestly say is put a little bit of yourself into your characters, little things that you feel or you understand. So like if you really love the smell of cookies but can't stand the taste of chocolate, maybe have a character who does that. So you can write it well. Write things that you have experienced, because you're going to write them better. It's as simple as that. Hey, how's it going, kitty? Come on. You want to be a lap kitty. The other kind of insert character, which people don't normally talk about, because author insert character takes up a lot of hate. And honestly, like I was going to say in the Mary Sue video, rightly so in a lot of cases. And you don't want to be a lap kitty. Is the audience insert character. And that's a really good device you can use. One, you're not likely to worry about hurting them. But the main thing is, if you have a world where shit's weird, like if you're doing a story about Fuck, if you're doing a new journalism novel about Black Dahlia, you don't really have to worry about an audience insert character because you don't really need. Probably explain what it is real quick. An audience insert character is a character who is there to have the story explained to them, the weird stuff explained to them. So, if I'm setting a story in modern day Earth, but there's really vampires, and the main characters are vampires. The audience insert character then is the person who doesn't know anything about vampires who's now being drawn into that world. So now you can have someone stop, look at the audience insert character, like I said, I think 2 videos ago, and go, hey, this is what a vampire is. This is what kills them. This is where we come from, or this is how we're made. Blah, blah. I want to bite your hippocampus. I don't fucking know. But however you want to do vampires, you can have explain the audience insert character. And like I said in the last one, you want natural dialogue with that. But like I've said before, Glenn Cooper, the Doctor's Companions, characters who come in and have the story or story elements explained to them in kind of a nod to the audience and kind of a wink to go, hey, we get it that you're not going to get it. It's a really useful tool as long as, again, you don't overuse it or you use it improperly. Having an audience insert character come in the second novel, and now you're explaining everything that's going wrong, that's weird in your series, that's not going to work. Having an audience insert character come in the second novel when everything's changed, and so that's kind of okay. You can also, in a circumstance where the laws of your world have changed, you can have your main character become the audience insert character. But you also have to understand, typically speaking, audience insert character is going to be, to an extent, your main character. They may not be the main focus of your story, but whoever your reader empathizes with, that's their main character. So you'll want to make them interesting. You'll want to don't go fucking overboard, but you'll want to make them something that the reader wants to read about. And I think that's pretty much it. I'm sure I glossed over something, so let me know. And yeah, I'm gonna try to run something up here in a minute too. So, good night. Have fun.